to another episode of Walking the Path of Grief with me, Di Atherton. And yes, it has been a while since the last episode. And that was because I had some physical health challenges. I had some back issues that kind of knocked me off my feet for a couple of weeks. And I have to say, there is one thing that makes you fully present with your body, and that is pain. It obliterates anything else. Nothing else matters. You don't care what is going on in the world around you when you are faced with this debilitating pain in your body. I'm very blessed. It's much better now. But yeah, I had a rough couple of weeks. And sometimes we have to pay attention to our bodies and not always think we must push through. And interestingly enough, I met with a friend today who struggles with a chronic illness, and she in fact has an organization which supports and educates people who have chronic illnesses. And she is organizing an expo later on this year, and I'm going to be giving a talk on the impact of grief on our physical bodies. And the thing is, we can also experience grief when we lose our health. And there's a beautiful quote, which I absolutely love, which says, "Health is the crown that the healthy wear, that only the sick can see." Health is the crown that the healthy wear, that only the sick can see. Because let's be honest, most of us don't really value our health until we don't have it, whether it's temporary or more permanent. And when you lose your health on a long-term basis or permanent basis, you will grieve the loss of the well-being, the vitality, the health that you had before whatever it is that happened to you, whether it's an accident or whether it's an illness that took your health. And this is the thing about grief is, first of all, there are so many different kinds of grief. And when I say grief, a lot of people think, just referring to the death of someone, the physical death of someone. But the loss of your health or the loss of your body's ability to function the way it always has done has its own kind of grief. And then, because, as I've said in previous episodes, grief isn't just one emotion. It's many different emotions, and it shows up in different ways depending on the person, depending on if the person is in touch with their emotions, depending if the person is someone who just consistently suppresses emotions, or thinks like, I've had my crying, I cried at the funeral, I'm over it. And I heard a story of someone I know whose boyfriend's grandfather died, and his boss at work said, I took a day to grieve my sister and I'm fine. And it just does not work like that. And it is, as a death doula and a grief guide, it is the most frustrating thing, that although grief is everywhere, impacts all of us at some point or another, it is so misunderstood. And again, and I'm probably going to say this in every episode, you do not get over grief. You learn to live your life around it. And a couple of weeks ago, I met with a mother whose 20-year-old son died in her arms in December last year. And he was an only child. She is divorced. He was her everything. And when she sent me her message, she said, I've been so busy with all the formalities, and I've just been numb, which is understandable. She said, but now I feel like I haven't dealt with the loss of my son. And it's like, there's nothing to deal with. I want you to understand that the body, the more I look at the body, the more I look at how there is always an underlying emotion, around physical illnesses, but also how the body protects us, how the body will always try and get our attention. When you've suffered a traumatic loss, and the loss of a child, I cannot even begin to imagine. I don't have children. To nurture a child to young adulthood and then to have that experience, you can't even begin to describe what that must be like. Your body will protect you. You feel numb for a reason. You feel like you are functioning on autopilot because that's what you're doing, because that at that time is the safest thing for you. It's the best way for you to operate. Because the reality is we don't just get the time to switch off, close out the world, and face our grief. We have to show up for work. We have to manage families. We have to manage responsibilities. We have to show up while we are grieving. And it's absolutely fine. And she and I were chatting about this. She said, she's been making silly mistakes at work, and she can sort of see her boss, a couple of months later is like, he's not saying anything. She said, but she can feel it from him. Like, your grief, like it's impacting your work. Well, hello, yes. That's why I started Workplace Bereavement, to educate people in businesses around what happens when someone is impacted by grief. So that feeling of numbness, of not having dealt with a loss, is perfectly normal. It's your body protecting your nervous system, which is now just like everything. Your world has been upended. And there are so many different aspects to the loss of someone. There is the familiar routines and habits, which your body is now going, oh, like this is all strange. There's something missing. It's like when you have a lot of animals, like if you have a number of dogs particularly, and one of them dies, the pack for a little while they're thrown off kilter. Something has changed, something is missing, and they have to adapt to that. So what your body does is it protects your nervous system. So that numbness, that sense of autopilot, is actually a good thing. And then over time, which is what happened to her, now we are December. Sorry, I'm going to do this on my fingers. January, February, like 4 months later, and she's now, her body's going, okay, now we can deal with the big emotions. And slowly, she's now in that process, and now she feels like she wants to reach out. And I can't emphasize this enough. Like, you have to allow your process to unfold for you. It's not anyone else's journey, and no one can tell you how it's going to be. You can't even say how it's going to be, because you literally, this is a path that you walk like one step, one day, one breath at a time. And it will always be raw. That loss is so deep, the loss of a child. It's every parent's biggest nightmare. But over time, the edges soften. You don't feel as bruised. There will always be times when it will flare up. I think often of people who lose children when they're teenagers, and then they don't get to experience. In South Africa, we have a matric farewell in their last year of school, and they all get dressed up and they have a wonderful sort of fancy celebration of 12 years of schooling coming to an end. You know, you have a child that won't experience that, or a daughter getting married and dad is not there to walk her down the aisle. And I saw a beautiful video the other day on social media of a couple getting married, and the bride's father had died. And in the front row, there was one of the chairs was a big photo of the father, framed photo, and father of the bride. And everyone in the bridal party came and lay a white rose on the chair. So they included him. And those kind of rituals can be really comforting to you when you are, especially in the early days of loss. That first year is so hard. We've just gone through Easter. I'm recording this just after the Easter weekend. And if it's the first Easter after a loss, it can be really hard because Easter, it's family time. It can often be everybody goes off to church, or there's big Easter lunches and Easter egg hunts, and somebody may be missing from that. I really want to reassure you, if you are listening to this and you have suffered the loss of someone, it does ease, it does soften. But that initial numbness, that sense of like, I'm not dealing with this, your body knows when you are ready to deal with it. So it's been an interesting couple of weeks in terms of how grief has shown up in different ways, and it just makes me more aware of how multi-layered our grief stories can be. It's not just one kind of loss. And chatting to her today, and she herself has a number of health issues and lives with constant pain. And she said to me, there is this sense of loss of the vitality of being able to walk pain-free. So remember that quote for yourself. Health is the crown that the healthy wear, that only the sick can see. If you have a crown of health, value it, treat it well. So that's kind of, what I wanted to chat about around grief. But what I really wanted to chat about in this podcast, but I also trust that what comes up in my life, what crosses my path, is what I need to share. But something else that came up, and it was sparked by a post I saw on LinkedIn, and someone had been sent, I don't know if it was a document or an advert about end of life and dying, and do you have all your ducks in a row? And she's like, oh, that really gives me the heebie-jeebies, and I don't want to think about this. And I have this question that I often ask people: if you died tomorrow, do people know who to contact? Do they know who your loved ones are? Do they know where your will is? Do they know who your attorney is? If you have animals, does anyone know what to do with your animals? If they have special dietary requirements, are they written down somewhere? If you have children, who's going to take the children? What happens to them? I've seen heartbreaking posts of people desperately trying to find homes for pets, often aging pets, because the owner has died suddenly or now is in hospital for an extended stay, and there's no one to look after the animals. And we often don't think of the chaos that we can leave behind if we don't have a will, or we don't at least have instructions as to what needs to happen to our things. And it's not morbid. You know how often if I broach the subject, people go, oh no, that's too morbid, I don't want to talk about that. Well, I'm sorry, it's reality. It is reality. You have to think about it, especially, you know what, if you are, I mean, as this woman said, you know, her son was 20, so he didn't have any real assets. He didn't have anything of great value. He was cared for by his mom. He had some medical issues. But if you have dogs, cats, pets, children, family you're responsible for, whatever it is, you know, someone's going to have to come into your home and get rid of your things. Like, leave instructions. It's going to happen to all of us. I now have a contact list. There's one on my kitchen board, there's one in my car, and there's one in my handbag. Because most of the people, they know that I have a brother and a sister. They have no idea how to get hold of them. So they don't know where my bank accounts are. They don't know anything about my life. I live alone. I don't have a partner who would know these things. And very often when a spouse or a partner dies, the remaining person is clueless, because hubby always paid the bills, or my wife always sorted things like that. So have a list. Either give it to someone you trust or put it with your will. Have a basic will. Because it's difficult enough for people who are grieving and then have to face all these formalities. So you're already exhausted. You're already overwhelmed. You're already trying to deal with your job, plus make time for your grief, maybe raising a family. So at least have the practicalities of what it is you need to get together, so that if you die, there's a list, there's an instruction as to what needs to happen. What kind of funeral do you want? Do you even want a funeral, or do you just want to be cremated and your ashes scattered in the garden? Like, you know, simple things like that. Because people don't know. And they're already all over the place, and this just adds to the stress. And I don't know if any of you watched Ian Famemity's videos. I think, unfortunately, they've been taken down on YouTube and Facebook. But he did a whole series of videos because he chose to end his life. He watched his parents in old age struggle financially and physically. And he was only in his early 60s. He was an artist, a performer here in South Africa. And he said, I don't want to do that. But he did a series of videos on this process of telling his loved ones what his plans were, putting his affairs in order, making sure that everything was taken care of. And he came in for a lot of criticism. He didn't call it suicide. I can't remember. He called it self-preservation, can't remember the term that he used. But the judgment, the criticism, how selfish he was. It wasn't fair on his loved ones. Well, you know, it's his life, and whether you agree with it or not, it's simply your opinion. But he couldn't face what he saw his parents go through. Do I agree with it or not? I don't know. Would I do something like that if I was in that position? I don't know, because I've never been in that position. But end of life is something we all have to come to terms with. And if anything, it should encourage us to live every day to the fullest and not to sweat the small stuff. Because none of us know when it's our time. And there's often so much. One of the things I really see people struggling with when they're grieving is the things that were left unsaid, or the regrets. The regret that they didn't have the conversation, that they didn't tell them what the person meant to them. They didn't tell them how much they appreciated them. They never said, I love you. There's so many regrets. So don't wait. Don't ignore this topic. And if you are a business owner or a manager or a supervisor in a company, don't think that 3 to 5 days of bereavement leave is going to fix the problem for your employee, because it isn't. That's just the start. They are still in that, depending on who died, they are still in that space of like numbness. Now they have to come to work and show up and be productive and be as they were before the loss, only they're not the same person. So if we can just show a little bit of compassion to someone who has suffered a loss, whether it is the loss of a pet or a miscarriage or a stillbirth, it doesn't matter. It's still a loss and they are grieving. It is not for us to judge their grief or how long it should go on for or how we expect it to show up. We can't know. This topic is, it's impossible to give anybody a brief or a manual as to how all this is going to work. All I did that day was listen to this woman's story as she sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. I just let her talk. And when we parted ways, she just said to me, that was so therapeutic. And often that's what's needed, is someone just to witness their grief, not to fix it. I said to her, like, this is going to be the hardest year of your life. It's going to feel impossible at times. But now you get to live life because your son didn't. Give him that. And she said to me, like, there were times in the last couple of months she's considered ending it, but she said, I can't because I have to carry on for him. It's a tough one. There are no easy answers. There are no solutions. There is just experiencing. And just as you experience the pain, the physical pain of a health issue, so you experience the pain of grief. And it's through experiencing the pain of grief that you learn to manage it and live with it in your own unique way. Just remember that. This is your journey, your unique journey, and it will show up however it's meant to for you, and that is perfect. See you soon.